Oh, Andrew, I think you've got a bit of an echo on your end. I don't know if you want to mute your speaker. You definitely have. Um, right. Okay. So this is part two of the series of webinars that Net Defense have kindly done with us here at the NEAA. I'm going to hand over to Deborah now, who's going to cover off what the risks of cyber are to the supply chain and manufacturing in general. So, Deborah, can I hand over to you?
Yeah, thanks very much. So I'm the Managing Director of Net Defense. As Joe said, this is the second of our 3 series of webinars. Today we're going to be looking at the threat landscape for manufacturing as an entire sector. And then the final session that's due, I think, in about 2 weeks' time, we'll deep dive into supply chain. So we're not going to touch on supply chain risks today, but we're going to look at the other risks that we have. When you look across UK organisations and businesses, we really do continue to be a prime target for cyber criminals. The news continues to report really high, large-scale cyber attacks, most recently Marks and Spencer's, Harrods, the Co-op, which is great that it's getting into the press, but this can really give a false sense of security for smaller organisations. When you look at the makeup of UK businesses, the UK population is about 99.9% of small and medium enterprises. At the start of 2024, the government reported 99.2 of that were small businesses with fewer than less than 50 employees themselves. Of the estimated 5.5 million SMEs that operate across the UK, 5% make up of the manufacturing sector. But what is surprisingly of that 5%, 9% count for the employment and 14% of them for the turnover. Adding to that, Make UK reported in July 2024 that the UK is the 12th largest manufacturing nation in the world. We are contributing 207 billion to the economy in 2023, employs over 2.6 million across the UK, and provides 38.8 billion of UK business investment, which is about 14% of the total. All of those things combining together makes manufacturing a high risk and lucrative target for cyber criminals. The risk is growing as manufacturing continues to embrace smart factories and bringing operations online. Recent times, our focus has really been on external threats, including ransomware and phishing, and they continue to be there and right up there with risk. But we are diverting our attention from inside a threat, and it's a critical risk that we really need to be paying a little bit more attention to. Reports have revealed that 70% of data loss is caused by careless or malicious insider action, highlighting the critical need for strong internal security measures. We're going to kind of look across the threat landscape, as I said, for manufacturing. So first, let's look at why manufacturing itself is a target. As operations continue to digitize, bringing factories and plants online, often for the first time, this throws up a number of vulnerabilities, and cyber criminals just love a vulnerability, and they thrive on exploiting those vulnerabilities. In 2024, manufacturing was third in the sector table for data incidents reported by the ICO. So the ICO is the Information Commissioner's Office, and they're primarily focused on personal information and making sure that is secure and protected across the UK. Looking at the vulnerabilities themselves, productivity prioritization. So historically, manufacturing, their top priority is being as productive as possible, and that it's not going to change, but we really need to help try and get a balance in that, looking at kind of security. But maintenance and updates and patching will take time, and that can really take down your manufacturing time if you don't schedule and plan that in advance. Legacy and specialist hardware and technology. From a security perspective, legacy and age technology across all sectors has the greatest risk and has the greatest challenge. And it's fair to say that manufacturing has a lot of that within its manufacturing setup. What I would say is that just because a device is out of support or no longer has maybe ever been security patched to keep it as safe as possible, doesn't mean that we can't work around that. So engaging with your IT departments or your IT provider externally and cyber specialists to really see how you can continue to use that, which can often be very expensive kit, continue to use it, but bring that risk down as low as possible. Employee experience, as you're bringing plants and factories online, you're talking about employees who've maybe not ever been online at work and maybe are not heavily online in their personal life as well, making themselves a risk and a target. Organizational structure. Plants are often siloed, department to department, so there's not a lot of face-to-face engagement, which also drives a high volume of email traffic, both internally and then also from the myriad of suppliers that are part of any manufacturing supply chain. And then complexity. Manufacturing itself can be far more complicated than any other sector, with multifaceted production processes, and then in themselves generate risk within the sector. Why must your business protect personal and confidential data? PwC study found that 85% of clients, so your customers, would stop using a service or manufacturing provider if they perceived a lack of security. Criminals will exploit this, knowing that you are more likely to go to greater lengths to secure your data and get it back should it be stolen than other areas, protecting your reputation and that customer trust relationship. Added into that, and we'll touch on it a little bit more when we get in the supply chain session in a couple of weeks, is also protecting prototypes and new cars that are coming to the market and making sure that they are not leaked in any way. And the number of supply chain providers that get involved in those, it's really important that that is protected at all costs. It's fair to say that not all businesses are created equal. So when it comes to the data that you may collect, hold, or process, you really need time to consider what is important to you and what the risk would be should it be lost, stolen, or destroyed, both by insider risk and also an external cyber attack. You also have to consider your ability to operate. The likelihood is that you are part of a huge supply chain network, and not being able to fulfill any orders into that supply chain is going to have a knock-on effect and could impact your relationship in that supply chain and continuing to be able to provide manufacturing parts into that supply chain. It's essential that you're able to operate and fulfill those orders for you to continue to be an operational business. What is a data loss event? So where we talk about cyber and it's really high focus, it does distract us away from the insider threat. So bringing it all together, a data loss is basically any data that is stolen, exposed, or lost, or deleted in either whether it be accidental or with malicious intent. Proofpoint reported that 85% of organizations worldwide had suffered at least one data loss event in 2024, and the UK figure stands at about 73%. So slightly better than the rest of the world, but still not great at nearly 3/4 of organizations. Alarmingly, 10% of the affected organizations reported more than 30 incidents within the 12-month period. So it's not one hit, one incident. It is really widespread and it's happening repeatedly. The root cause of the breaches was somewhat even more surprising from my point of view, with 70% of organizations claiming that it was down to human error or negligence. So that internal problem and that internal threat. The ICO themselves reported that 66% of data incidents in 2024 were non-cyber related. Ultimately, data loss does have, at its core, a human-based problem. The risk is magnified when you consider a lot of cyber attacks, such as phishing, also rely on human interaction to be successful, meaning human engagement is moving higher and higher up from that risk perspective. So looking at what a careless user is, so it's somebody that isn't necessarily acting with malicious intent. Often their actions are just simply a mistake, human error. However, it doesn't really matter from a consequence perspective whether the cyber criminal comes in, kicks down your front door, or whether an employee accidentally leaves it wide open. They're equally devastating from your ability to either operate, your reputation, or financial loss. Most common careless user actions include misdirected emails, engaging with a phishing attack, sharing data to the wrong person or the wrong organization, and installing unauthorized software. In 2024, Proofpoint went on to report that 1% of users were responsible for around 88% of data loss events. So not only are we seeing them multi-layered up, but it's a small core of your organization that potentially is the one that's causing the repeat issues. After careless use as technical failures on the next leading cause of data loss, this can typically be traced back to two root causes. So a compromised system, that is someone external getting into your system, or a misconfigured system, both of which will still stem back to human oversight, with around 50% of technical failures being attributed to a user mistake. So that configuration of your firewall or your additional security hasn't been configured correctly. We've even seen instances of where a firewall's been purchased but not turned on. Same with antivirus software. That would be down to the human who is responsible for installing it to make sure it's designed and set up and functioning as you need it to. If we take that statistic at face value, from an email point of view, an organization with 500 employees would expect around 340 misdirected emails within the year. Alarmingly, around 84% of those would contain some kind of sensitive information. If you think about when we've all sent an email to the wrong person, the external reported figure is about a third of us have sent an email to the wrong person. I would say that that is massively underreported. We've all done it, and unfortunately more than once. If you think about that, that is really what's driving that data loss through email. The impact of misdirected emails can range from anything from mild embarrassment to severe reputational damage, financial penalties leveraged by the ICO, and then further legal consequences should that data include personal information. It's worth noting that personal information includes your employee information. It's not just personal information you might hold for someone outside of your business. More than 90% of organizations that experienced an incident reported that they had negative consequences from that. 50% said it disrupted their daily business operations, and 40% suffered reputational damage. So moving on for an accidental data loss and looking at that malicious user action within your organization. It doesn't really matter which way it happens, the consequences can be exactly the same. However, when it comes to intentional action, that's the one that you need to be probably paying the most attention to. One of the most common causes for an intentional security breach is a disgruntled employee, an issue that can be tough to detect within an organization, but there are some early warning signs I encourage you to think about as you're dealing with your employees. So it could be an employee who's about to face or is going through a disciplinary action, those that are being passed over for a promotion, or individuals who are being monitored for poor performance. At that point, they're likely going to be a bit disgruntled with the organization. It's rare in those circumstances the employee accepts responsibility, particularly early in the process. So it's really about ensuring that access to data and sensitive information is reviewed regularly. And if you do have employees in these situations, part of that procedure should include what access they have and making decisions to maybe suspend or reduce access during that review period. Some of the risks are a little bit tougher to spot. So we know that employees who experience financial hardship, those struggling with mental health challenges, or dealing with an addiction or trying to recover from addiction are far more vulnerable into committing malicious acts, normally for financial gain. So having that in mind when you're having these interactions with your employees, if they are sharing that they're in these circumstances, we need to also consider how that puts them at risk, particularly for really sensitive information within your organizations. Look at data loss in 2024. There was 33,383, a lot of threes, were reported. It's worth noting with the ICO, the majority of it's self-reported. So the only way the ICO is going to find out about something that doesn't come from you as an organization is if one of your customers or your employees reports you to the ICO. So that stat is really about self-reporting. The top 10 sectors make up about 88% of these incidents. And as I said, 66% is attributable to non-cyber. Retail and manufacturing are put together by the ICO, and they're third in the table, accounting for 12% overall of those incidents that were reported. When manufacturing really bucks the trend is cyber versus non-cyber. Overall, we normally see 60% are non-cyber and 40% there or thereabouts are attributable to cyber. For your sector, 71% were recorded as cyber events. Looking at those incidents, they were primarily caused by ransomware, phishing attacks, and then that famous other non-categorized. We see that a lot, and that's just because when you report yourself to the ICO, you have 72 hours to report it. At that point, you might not know the root cause, so it will get often tagged at your first report rather than your second or third report as you get the information. The remaining 29% is categorized as non-cyber, with the most common being unauthorized access, data being emailed to the wrong recipient, and then that other one again. Looking at unauthorized access, again, this flies really high and bucks against the trend for other sectors. When we look at analysis of this type, it really does stand out as an issue across manufacturing and retail. What we talk about unauthorized access is we recommend the best practice is least privilege. So you give your employees access only to what they need to do their job. And if there are instances where that needs to be widened for a period of time, you put it on or with a time limit to it and then reduce that back down. It really is about accidental or where someone has gone with an ulterior motive to see how far their access will give them and what they're able to do. Given the sensitivity of prototypes, new cars coming to the market and the real sensitive in managing that, it is something that you do need to think about within your organizations, making sure, particularly when you're engaging with that type of work, you really are protecting that super sensitive information. For those reported to the ICO, they took various actions. 65% had informal action taken. So that's where it will be a reprimand or a warning to make sure that you don't see that happen again within your organisation. Full investigation pursued was at 1%, and no further action is 26%. It's right to report yourself to the ICO because sometimes you get a response straight away to say, thanks for letting us know. It's not an incident we need to be worried about, but it's giving you that assurances that you are doing the right thing. And when the stats were pulled out for 2024, 8% were still under investigation at that point. External cyber attacks. So while, I do want you to be thinking about insider threat, we can't ignore the external threats that are happening, and they are becoming more and more sophisticated and more prevalent across the UK and across the world. We'll explore the most common types in the next few minutes. Phishing, it's a social engineering-based attack, fairly well known, I think, by this point. Social engineering is where the attacker is going to manipulate the individual, revealing sensitive information or performing an action that compromises your business security. These methods allow cyber criminals to bypass your external technical controls entirely because they're already in to your network and engaging with somebody within your organization. Typically, attackers will send mass emails, hence the phishing, throwing a big net out to see how many they can catch. And while it's not new, it continues to still be one of the biggest methods of attack for the UK. They're attempting to steal sensitive data such as passwords, bank details, or to be able to deploy malware such as ransomware, which we'll talk a little bit in more detail in a few minutes. It's fair to say gone are the days to easily spot the scam emails riddled with spelling mistakes, poor grammar. Today, cyber criminals are being more sophisticated. They're using AI-driven language models to craft very convincing messages, using sometimes local dialect, local slang, asking for the right tone of voice. So they are really taking their time to get this right. Phishing isn't limited to email. It's also worth noting that we are seeing an increase in both text messages and WhatsApp messages, often referred to smishing, which is the SMS part of it, and then also vishing, which is the use of voice calls to solicit the same information. Next would be spear phishing. So where phishing is a wide net that is being thrown out to catch as many as possible. Spear phishing is much more targeted. So they've already decided who within an organization or just a member of the public that they want to target. They'll focus on the specific individual. They'll gather as much information from public source, such as social media, companies' websites, companies' house, and they're going to layer that up to make that attack seem more real and more convincing for the individual that would receive that communication. They're often designed to appear as if they're coming from a trusted colleague or a senior figure within your own organization, not always an external person. They may include personal details, such as the target's job role, recent projects. If you've been to a recent event or you've received an award, it may be built around that. And they'll layer that up with a little bit of sense of urgency to pressurize the victim into thinking before they act. And that phishing and all types of phishing attacks, they are built that way. They want your bias, they want your initial gut reaction to it, so that you don't stop and think. More often than not, if we stop and think, we wouldn't click the link, we wouldn't engage, we wouldn't return. They're really, really playing on the fact of trying to get you to respond as a gut reaction, get you on the hop, really. What is newer, which I don't particularly like the term because I'm now called a whale when it comes into it, is whaling, also known as CEO fraud and executive phishing. So this is a bit like spear phishing, but they're now targeting the big fish within your organization. They're spending even more time to get these right. Also looking at those high profile individuals within your organization, which are easier to find because they're often listed by name, whether they're directors or they're engaging with public records that you might be putting out there, out in the press, speaking to the public, does make them easier to find within our organizations. And it's really the goal of stealing financial information, authorizing fraudulent transactions, or gaining access to really sensitive and confidential information. If you think the higher up an organization you go, the more they have access to the most secret information that you hold within your organization. So they are going to take time. They're only going to get this chance once with this individual, and they want to make it as believable as possible. Looking at it, when you look at the percentages of success, you can see why they're spending more time. So on a phishing, typically it has around an 18% success rate. It doesn't move around much year on year. While you look at spear phishing, it's more like 53% of those attacks are successful. Whaling is slightly newer. We don't really have any stats on that yet, but given the high success rate for spear phishing, it's fair to say we would expect the whale to be a higher percentage. Because if you think about that, they're not dealing with the everyday when they're at that level. So while you might be educating your employees on best cyber practices, being safe online, it's not always the case that the CEO, the CFO, your directors, vice presidents, however you're set up as an organization, they may not be joining in those training and that education, which makes them a little bit more vulnerable than other leaders within your organization. So what should you do if you are targeted by a phishing attack? You need to really trust your gut. And we all do things in such a hurry and we get such a large volume of emails in our inbox every day. But it is stop and think and slow down a little bit. Even if the request appears to be from a senior executive, really take time to consider, would I be asked this? Is it normal that I would be asked to do this, even by maybe the owner of the company? I guarantee if you pick up the phone to double check, the likelihood of them getting pissed at you and doing that is slim. However, if you engage with it, do it, and then check, that's a whole other conversation at that point. If you suspect you have fallen victim of a phishing attack, whether it be in the workplace or at home and in your personal life, if cash is involved, the first call is to your bank. The banks are trying to bring in better practices. If you think it's bank-to-bank transfer, when the money is leaving yours, it's going into another bank. They're trying to get into partnerships where they are better at retrieving that money and bringing it back. So you do have a small period of time. By notifying your bank, there is still a chance they can get their hands on that payment and bring it back, or at least have it isolated on the receiving bank side so the individual never receives the funds. So don't think, oh, it's too late, it's not worth it, I'm embarrassed. People are calling the banks all day, every day. It's one of the few call numbers that when you place it with the bank, it's picked up pretty swiftly because they know that time is of the essence. So don't reside yourself in the fact that that money is lost. Give the bank a call. If cash isn't involved in the phishing attack, then it really is about engaging with your IT department or your IT provider and doing that as fast as possible. We're able to stop a lot of attacks going any further, certainly even within my business and the sister businesses that make up our family businesses. We've had a number of instances where 365 credentials, for example, have been put into a phishing attack. They've notified us in IT, we've changed their password, and it's all been done before the attacker then starts to try and use those credentials. So it really is, if you suspect, you're much better to just take the action and have it checked rather than trying to check out from your side. The absolute worst is to kind of bury your head in the sand and hope that it hasn't happened. There are steps that you can do to reduce your risk within your organization. One effective measure is to a report phishing button. For us, it's a little red fish that sits in the top right-hand corner of our email. And it is free to turn that on as part of 365. So you're working with 365, your IT can configure it. What it allows the employee to do is to report something as phishing without having to forward that email on. Every time we forward an email that has a credible threat inside it, the chances of someone clicking it, opening it, engaging with it increases every time it moves down the chain. So by using the phishing button, it isolates the email, it removes it from your inbox, and it lets help your IT team to go take a look at it and see if there's action for them to take from it. Providing regular, continuous employee training is essential. Regular phishing simulation can also be incredibly helpful. So what that does is you are going to receive an email from your cyber or your IT provider that is going to mimic what a phishing email would do outside of your organization. If the individual then engages with it, they would be sent a small training video, helping them to make better choices in the future. What it does is no one wants to be on the bad list. So it becomes a bit of a game, but a really healthy game when it comes to cyber security. Every time they get an email, they're asking, is that a net defense email? Because I don't want to be on that bad list. But it means they look at every email in the same way. So if there is one that gets through our external defenses, they're already thinking about, too good to be true? Is this the type of communication I would be expecting? Really keeps it at the forefront of their mind. It's also crucial that you foster a no blame culture within your organization. If an employee fears punishment, repercussion, because they've fallen victim to a phishing attack or any other type of cyber attack, they are going to avoid reporting that incident. And time is of the absolute essence here, increasing the risk of further damage if they don't self-report them. Encouraging that culture of openness, supporting ensures that employees feel comfortable to report security concerns without hesitation and knowing that they're not living in fear of a consequence coming back their way. What we do within Net Defence and within Ogilvy Group is anyone who reports it will get an email from our IT departments thanking them for reporting it. They'll also get an email from their managing director, again, thanking them. Employees talk to employees, so even if it was a credible threat, they press the link, they put their password in, they still get those emails and they will tell other employees, wow, I told them myself, I didn't get in trouble for it, and I managed to stop it, slow it down, or nothing bad happened because I told someone and I got the right help. You can't underestimate the value of this within your organizations. Moving on to ransomware, I think very well known and documented and depicted in the news, films, TV shows. These are attacks where criminals will encrypt your systems. And you're going to see it a lot like you've probably seen it in the movies. The screens are going to go blank. No one will be able to access your system, your data, your information. We'll normally have some kind of message on the screen asking someone to call a number, and they're going to be asking for cash in return back for your systems. In more recent ones, we're seeing in the news that they're using Teams to communicate. So they're leaving the Teams application open and then communicate with individuals within the organization, telling them how much the ransom is going to cost to get your data back. The National Cyber Security Centre, UK law enforcement, is strongly advising against paying ransoms. But there are lots of stories of organizations who are saying that they did negotiate. They negotiated to extend the period of time to find out what the criminals had stolen, but never had intention of paying. And I think it's also fair to say that a lot of organizations are paying. In 2023, it's stated that 63% of organizations did pay that ransom. Only 34% fully recovered their data after they made the payment. 46% were forced to pay multiple ransoms, and 17% paid and got nothing back. So it is about weighing up that risk at that point. You are dealing with a criminal. They're not really going to have the ethics and morals and principles we have. So there's no guarantee that making the payment is going to get you anything back. It also worth noting it doesn't protect you from penalties and fines from the ICO, because just because they've given you your information back doesn't mean that they've made it public or put it on the dark web or sold it on to other cyber criminals to be abused. The NCSC and the ICO are encouraging organisations to seek the help, both from them and from law enforcement, to help when you're suffering with a ransomware attack, both of the immediate effect and after the fact. They're looking to support your investigation and contribute efforts, and by sharing the information can help them to stop future attacks on other organisations. So how can you defend against ransomware attacks? Regular backups. So ensuring that your data is backed up and stored separately from your organisational systems to prevent attackers from accessing it. If they can get their hands on your backup and also your live system, at that point, they're backing you into a corner, because without that and without the backup, what are you going to recover with? You'd have to build everything from scratch. So they absolutely are looking for their backup before they'll trigger that encryption action on your systems. Also, remember to please test your backups. I don't know if you will remember, but years ago, the iPhone, when you got a new one, you created your new one off a backup from your old one, and we've probably all had that message of this backup is corrupted, you can't recover from it, you can't build on it. The same is true for your data and your IT infrastructure. So making sure that you're at least doing a monthly restoration test to make sure that should the worst happen, you can actually recover from the backup that you have, and making sure those backups are happening on a frequency with the amount of data you're prepared to lose. So if you back up weekly, the maximum amount you're going to lose is 6 days to 7 days worth of data. If you're backing up hourly, 59 minutes worth of data. So making sure those backups are happening in the most frequency that matches your risk profile and how much you're trying to protect within your organization. A couple of other best practices is bringing in two-factor or multi-factor authentication. This is where you're going to get a code or a password to a separate device. So when you're logging onto your laptop, for example, you're going to put that password in. It's then going to ask you for an additional one. What that means is if your device was stolen, but you still had the authentication device separately, they can't go any further without both devices. Or someone's compromised your password, when they try to log in, they're going to need that second code, and they're not going to have access to that code as well. So really great steps in protecting both at home and in the workplace. And then patch management. So that's making sure that your systems remain patched and up to date. So think about the iOS updates that come out from Apple. If you go back a couple of years ago, it would all be about new user interface, new great user benefits, new emojis, new screens. In fact, it was always had security patching behind that, but the engagement from users was all about the user interface of that device. Now they're being very open and honest about there being a vulnerability, a risk in it. And the same is true of laptops, servers, and all of your equipment that you are operating with on a day-to-day basis. For the last bit, I want to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence, AI. Comes up quite a lot when I'm talking out in networks and with customers and potential customers. Cyber criminals' use of AI is not as new as you might think. Back in 2019, the UK CEO fell victim of an AI-powered voice spoofing scam. But even he was speaking with his boss, the chief executive of a parent company, he was deceived by the cyber criminal who manipulated him into transferring $243,000. And that was based on information given over the phone, but not verified separately. So no follow-up email, no checks before that money left the bank. Today, AI is more advanced and widely available more than ever, and it's not going to go anywhere. Many people use ChatGPT or similar tools. Cybersecurity professionals themselves are leveraging AI to combat threats. Unfortunately, the criminals also are using this to enhance their attacks on us as individuals and as organizations. On the dark web, there are several versions, but there is one called Worm GPT. and it's a black hat alternative to the AI engine language models that we use on the open internet today. It's been developed with no ethical safeguards. It will pretty much do anything that the user asks them to do, unlike the models that we're all using on the normal internet today. Provides the individuals with little or no technical experience in the right tools, scripts, or even instructions on how to execute sophisticated cyber attacks. When AI tools emerged, the fear was that robots would replace humans and replace their jobs. I think really at the point we're at now, the real threat is not a robot, it's a human using AI to either steal data, money, and/or identities. The fight between security professionals and cyber criminals mirrors the classic good versus evil, the cat and mouse struggle we see in all the films, with each side adapting new technologies and new approaches in trying to make either the defense of an attack or the attack itself the most successful it can be. Hackers themselves fall into three categories. We've got the white hat hacker. They're an ethical hacker who, with your permission, normally a purchase service, will simulate an attack to identify vulnerabilities to help organizations strengthen their real-world security. Black hat is the malicious actors, the threat actors as they're sometimes known, who are going to exploit the vulnerabilities in your system for personal or financial gain. And then you have grey hat, which is a mix of both. They will hack your system without permission, but they don't always act with malicious intent. Sometimes this is to inform organizations of the vulnerabilities they've identified and seek payment to fix them or to give guidance on what they've found. Regardless of the intent, all three groups are now integrating AI into their toolkits, making cyber threats more sophisticated and harder to detect. And that's kind of it for today. I don't know if there's any questions.
That was really good, Deborah. Thank you. I always feel cheery after one of your sessions.
Yeah, it's always a bright, cheery topic.
The one thing I learned is when I worked in IT is where the history of black hat and white hats came from. It's Westerns, because the good guys wore white hats and the bad guys wore black hats, which I thought was quite cool.
Yeah.
But no questions from me. I was going to ask what would you suggest would be your top 3 free hit tips for trying to stay clear? I think you touched on quite a few within the presentation.
Yeah, I think training. So there are lots of great providers out there, and not all of them come at a cost. So I think the NCSE is a great source of training, and you can sign up, depending on the size of your organization, you can sign up to bite-sized updates. They also put a lot of toolkits out there, a lot of training videos. The same is true of the Northeast Business Resilience Centre. So I sit on their board. They do some great work in really supporting SMEs in both training for prevention, but also if the worst does happen, they also provide services to help you to recover from those. I think employee training is without doubt definitely something. If you're not doing it, you should be investing in it, and it doesn't have to cost money. It is going to cost you time. I think that phishing button also is really valuable. It means that you're basically enabling fast reporting of threats within your organization, and making sure that they're able to tell you what they think will happen. And the no blame culture. If you don't have a no blame culture, then no one's going to tell you anything. They're just going to bury their head in the sand and hope it doesn't come back to bite them, and hope that they didn't really click on a link, they didn't really give their password away. And those are, those are absolutely free to have from that point of view.
Excellent. Does anybody else have any questions before we wrap up the webinar?
No, good. Just thank you.
I think Andrew, you're muted. Hang on, let's see if I can fix that. I don't know if he's got a question or whether he's
No, he just said his microphone's on the fritz.
Oh, no worries. Well, we were getting a good disco echo before, so If there is any questions that you think of after the session, by all means, just reach out to Joe and he can put you in contact with me or one of the team here. And obviously, if you're listening to the webinar afterwards, again, Joe can connect you with us if you want to have any further conversations. And Craig Whiteman is at a lot of your networking events as well, so he's around should you have any questions.
And the other thing is the white paper from the last one has just been released. There was a slight delay, so we'll hold off until we get this white paper from this session, and then I'll push them out to everyone who's attended and the wider base. And then we've got the third one in 2 weeks, I believe.
Yes, just before my last to do before holidays. So on that one, we will be looking at supply chain risk in quite a lot of detail and looking at TISAC, which is the preferred security certification for the automotive sector across Europe. So we'll be deep diving into that as well. So hopefully that session will be useful.
Fantastic. All right, well, I'll wrap up the recording now. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.